My son set a folder of papers on the birthday cake table and told me I had two choices: sign the house over to him tonight, or pack a bag and be gone before the candles burned out. He said it quietly, almost gently, the way you'd tell a child it was bedtime. Behind him, my grandchildren were still wearing paper party hats, still humming happy birthday under their breath, not understanding yet that the celebration had already ended. I want to tell you who I was before that night, because the man who stood in that kitchen and said, okay, was not the man I used to be. And he was not, in the end, the man I stayed. My name is Walter Reeves. Everyone who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Walt. I'm 63 years old, and for 31 of those years I worked as a machinist at a tool and die plant outside Asheville, North Carolina, standing on concrete floors that ruined my knees and breathing metal dust that I'm sure did something to my lungs the doctors haven't found yet. I retired 8 months before that birthday, not because I wanted to, because the plant closed and offered me a pension that was smaller than I'd hoped and a handshake that was smaller still. I built the house I lived in with my own hands, mostly. Not from the ground up. I bought it as a fixer-upper in 1991 for $18,000 I'd saved working double shifts. But every wall I repainted, every floorboard I replaced, every wire I ran myself, because that was the one thing at least I knew how to do right. My wife Margaret picked the color for the kitchen, a soft yellow, because she said yellow rooms made people forgive each other faster. I used to laugh at that. I don't laugh at it anymore. I understand exactly what she meant. Margaret died 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already made itself at home. I was with her at the end, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and cut flowers, holding a hand that had gone thin and cool in mine. 2 days before she passed, when the pain medication gave her clear hours instead of foggy ones, she asked me to bring her a pen and a stack of stationery from the drawer at home. She spent an afternoon writing. She sealed what she wrote into a cream-colored envelope, wrote my name on the front in her looping cursive, and made me promise not to open it until, her words, the day you need it more than you need anything else in the world. I promised her the way you promise a dying woman anything. And then I put that envelope in the bottom drawer of my dresser, under folded sweaters, and for 6 years I told myself I would never need it, because needing it would mean something had gone badly wrong, and I preferred to believe nothing ever would. I should tell you about my son Curtis, and I want to be fair to him, because fairness is something Margaret cared about more than almost anything, and I'm trying to carry that forward even now. Curtis was not a bad boy. He followed me into the garage every Saturday of his childhood, handed me wrenches before I asked for them, memorized the names of tools most grown men can't identify. When he was 12, he built a birdhouse in shop class and gave it to his mother for Mother's Day, and she kept it hanging from the porch eave for the rest of her life, repainting it every couple of years so it would survive the weather. It's still there. I checked the last time I dared to drive past. Curtis married a woman named Vanessa when he was 28. She grew up 2 towns over, in a rental house that changed twice during her childhood because her father's construction business kept collapsing and reopening under new names to dodge the debts of the last one. She never talked about it much, but Margaret used to say you could see it in the way Vanessa looked at nice things, not with wanting exactly, but with a kind of hunger that had teeth in it. I didn't understand what Margaret meant by that until much later. By then it was already too late to matter. They gave us 2 grandchildren. Sophie, who is 11 and draws horses in the margins of every piece of paper she touches, and Ethan, who is 8 and has never once, in his whole short life, walked anywhere when he could run instead. I love them without complication. Loving grandchildren is the easiest kind of love there is. You get all the joy and none of the bill. Curtis opened a landscaping and hardscaping company 9 years ago. Small at first, a used truck, a trailer, 2 guys he paid in cash on Fridays. I helped him with the down payment on his first commercial mower, emptying most of what I'd managed to set aside beyond my regular retirement accounts. And I never once brought it up again because I didn't want him to carry it like a debt. I wanted him to carry it like a father's belief in him. For a few years, that's exactly what it seemed to be. The business grew. He took on paving contracts, retaining walls, a couple of big residential accounts in the nicer part of the county. Vanessa started posting photographs online of finished projects, tagged with the company name, always captioned with exclamation points. What I didn't know, what none of us outside that house knew, was that Curtis had leveraged nearly everything to win two large commercial contracts the year before my birthday, and that both of those clients had gone under within months of each other, owing him money he'd already spent on equipment, materials, and payroll he couldn't claw back. I didn't know that Vanessa's SUV, the one she photographed in front of, had a loan on it that was two payments behind. I didn't know that the beautiful new stone patio they'd built at their own house had been financed with a card that was nearly maxed. I found all of this out later, the way you find out about a fire after the smoke's already stained the ceiling. What I did notice, in the months leading up to that birthday, was a change in how they treated me. It came in small pieces, the way water finds its way into a foundation, crack, slow enough that you tell yourself it isn't happening, until one day you're standing in a flooded basement, wondering how you missed it. Vanessa started visiting more, always with some comment folded gently into the conversation. This house has good bones, Walt, but it's a lot of upkeep for one person. Have you thought about what happens if you fall on those stairs and nobody's here? There are some beautiful single-story places going up near the retirement community on Route 9, smaller yards, less to worry about. Every comment sounded like concern. Every comment left a small stone in my chest that I carried around without naming. Curtis started asking questions he'd never asked before. Where did I keep my important papers? Did I have a will? Had I ever considered putting the house in someone else's name just to keep it simple down the road? He asked casually, the way you'd ask about the weather. But I noticed he never once asked how I was actually doing. Alone in that house 6 years after burying his mother, the neighbor who lived beside me for almost 20 years, a retired county sheriff's detective named Gary Holloway, was the first person who said anything out loud. We'd stand at the fence some evenings, him with his coffee, me with mine, not saying much, the way two old men can be comfortable in silence. One evening in early spring, about 6 weeks before my birthday, he set his mug down on the fence post and looked at me sideways. You know your son and his wife have been out here twice this week with a tape measure, he said. Probably planning the birthday party, I told him. Curtis mentioned something about doing it at the house this year. Gary didn't say anything for a moment. Then he asked, You trust them, Walt? They're my family, Gary. That's not what I asked you. I didn't have an answer for him that evening, and I think that not having one should have told me something. Gary had spent 30 years reading people who lied for a living, and he wasn't in the habit of raising alarms he didn't believe in. Before he walked back to his own porch, he told me, If anything ever feels wrong in that house, you come next door. Doesn't matter what hour it is. I thought he was just being a good neighbor. I understand now that he was trying to hand me a rope before I fell. About 3 weeks before my birthday, a certified letter arrived from a law office downtown that I didn't recognize. I remember standing at my mailbox holding it, turning it over once and deciding it could wait. I assumed it was some kind of solicitation, or maybe paperwork related to the plant's pension fund winding down. I set it on the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl, and it sat there, unopened for over 2 weeks. I want you to remember that envelope. It matters later. In that same stretch of weeks, Curtis started calling more often than he had in years. Just checking in, Dad. You need anything from the hardware store? I'll swing by this weekend and look at that gutter. Vanessa brought over a casserole one Tuesday evening, the first home-cooked meal she'd ever carried through my front door in 14 years of marriage to my son, and I remember standing in my own kitchen holding that dish, feeling something loosen in my chest that I hadn't felt since Margaret died. I told myself it was real. I wanted so badly for it to be real that I stopped asking the questions Gary had asked me. Sophie and Ethan came along on some of those visits, and one Saturday, cleaning out the garage together, Curtis found his old Little League glove buried on a shelf behind a box of Margaret's canning jars. He turned it over in his hands and laughed. I slept with this thing next to my bed for a month after my first real game, he said. You remember that? I remember you were terrified some would steal it. I wasn't scared of much when you were around, he said, and for just a second, just one clean, unguarded second, I saw the boy who used to reach up and take my hand every single time we crossed a street, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. I let that memory carry me through the weeks that followed. I let it quiet every uneasy thing Gary had said, every strange question Curtis had asked, every stone Vanessa had left sitting in my chest. Grief makes a man hungry for tenderness. And I ate every scrap they offered me without checking what was underneath it. The week before my birthday, Vanessa called to finalize the plans. They'd host it at my house. My house, she said, because it was where all the good memories were, and I should relax and let them handle everything. Sophie wanted to help decorate. Ethan wanted to help bake the cake, though he mostly wanted to lick the bowl. I hung up that phone feeling, for the first time in longer than I could measure, like I still had a family that wanted me in it. I had no idea what they were actually building toward. I had no idea that a folder was already sitting in a drawer at Curtis's house, drawn up by a lawyer I'd never met, waiting for a signature. I had no idea that my birthday cake, in their plans, was never really the point of the evening. I had no idea that 6 years earlier, in a hospital bed, my wife had somehow already understood exactly what a night like this could look like, and had spent her last clear afternoon on Earth trying to make sure that if it ever came, I wouldn't walk into it defenseless. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew the morning of my 63rd birthday was that my son was coming to my house with balloons and a cake, and that for the first time in 6 years I woke up looking forward to the day instead of simply enduring it. By that evening, I would understand exactly how wrong I'd been about what kind of day it was going to become. The party started the way birthday parties are supposed to start. Streamers taped along the porch railing, a banner over the fireplace that Sophie had colored herself, misspelling Grandpa in a way that made me laugh out loud when I saw it. A dozen or so people came, a few old co-workers from the plant, Gary and his wife from next door, a cousin of Margaret's who still lived in town. Vanessa had ordered a cake from the good bakery on Main Street, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, 63 candles arranged in uneven rows, because apparently the bakery ran out of the little blue ones halfway through. For the first hour it was, I believed, the best birthday I'd had since Margaret died. Ethan sat on my lap while I opened a card he'd made with glitter glue that got everywhere. Sophie showed me a horse she'd drawn on the back of a paper plate and told me it was named after me, which I still don't fully understand, but choose to treasure anyway. Curtis put his arm around my shoulders at one point, in front of everyone, and said, to 31 years turning wrenches and never once complaining about it. To the best dad in Buncombe County. People clapped. I felt my throat tighten in the good way, the way that happens when you're loved out loud in front of witnesses. Then the guests started to thin out. Gary and his wife left around 8. Gary shaking my hand a beat longer than usual, saying, "Call if you need anything, you hear me," in a tone I registered but didn't understand yet. The old co-workers left not long after. Margaret's cousin hugged me and said she was proud of the family I'd raised, which I would think about later with a bitterness I didn't yet have the right to feel. By 9 o'clock it was just Curtis, Vanessa, the kids, and me. Sitting at the same oak dining table, Margaret and I had saved 6 months to buy back when Curtis was still in diapers. The cake sat mostly untouched in the center, candles melted down into uneven wax puddles. And that was when Curtis reached under his chair and pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed him bring in. "Dad," he said, setting it on the table between us, sliding it toward me with 2 fingers. "I want to talk to you about something, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything." I remember my stomach dropping before he'd said another word, the way your body sometimes knows before your mind catches up. He opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, a deed transfer, a quitclaim form, several pages I didn't understand stapled together with yellow tabs marking where I was supposed to sign. He explained it the way you'd explain something you'd rehearsed in a mirror. How the business was going through a rough patch. How a bridge loan would fix everything if he had collateral to secure it. How putting the house in his name was really just a formality, since I'd leave it to him eventually anyway. He said the word eventually like it was a kindness, like he was doing me a favor by not waiting for me to die first. I sat very still. I looked at Vanessa, who was watching me with an expression I can only describe as rehearsed patience, the look of someone waiting for a slow child to catch up to an obvious answer. I looked at Sophie and Ethan, still in their party hats at the far end of the table, half paying attention, half absorbed in some game on Ethan's tablet, utterly unaware that the ground under their grandfather's feet was being sold out from under him in real time. "I'm not signing that tonight, Curtis," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. His face changed. Not to anger, not yet, to something colder, more prepared. "Dad, I need this. The business needs this. If I don't secure financing by the end of the month, lose everything I've built. Everything Mom helped me start. Don't put your mother's name on this," I said, and I meant it as sharply as it sounded. That was when Vanessa leaned forward, folding her hands on the table like she was chairing a meeting. "Walt," she said, "we've talked about this. This house is too much for one person. You're going to need help eventually, and it makes more sense for everyone if we handle it now, while things are calm, instead of later when they might not be." "They are calm," I said. "You're the ones making this feel like an emergency." Curtis's jaw tightened. He looked at his watch, an actual, physical glance at his watch, like there was a clock running on this conversation that only he could see. Then he said the words that I will remember on the day I die, however many years from now that turns out to be. "Dad, I'm not asking anymore. Sign the papers tonight, or pack a bag and figure out somewhere else to sleep. I can't keep the business afloat and take care of an old house at the same time, and I'm done pretending otherwise." The room went very quiet. Even the kids looked up. I looked at my son, the boy who used to hand me wrenches before I asked, who slept with a baseball glove beside his bed, who once told me he was never scared of anything when I was around. And I understood in that single unbearable moment that the man sitting across from me had already decided the outcome before he ever walked through my front door that evening. The birthday party, the balloons, the cake, the 63 candles, none of it had been for me. It had been cover. A soft landing built around a hard ultimatum, so that if I resisted, I would look like the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the old man who couldn't accept his family's help. I thought about arguing. I thought about standing up and telling him exactly what I thought of an ultimatum delivered over birthday cake, in front of his own children, 6 years after we buried the woman who built this family in the first place. But something in me, some old, tired, grieving part of me, decided that a fight in front of Sophie and Ethan was a wound I refused to hand them to carry for the rest of their lives. So I said the only thing I had left to say. "Fine." I picked up the pen Vanessa had already set within reach, and I signed every page she pointed to, slowly, neatly, the way I'd been taught to fill out any legal form in my life. No rushing, no sloppiness, even when my hand felt like it belonged to someone else. When I finished, I slid the folder back across the table without a word. Curtis looked almost surprised that I'd actually done it. You're really signing?" "You gave me an ultimatum, Curtis. I'm answering it." Nobody spoke after that. I stood up, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out the suitcase Vanessa had apparently packed for me earlier that evening while I was out on the porch with Gary, zipped, ready, my blood pressure medication tucked neatly into the front pocket, as though she'd been planning my departure with more care than she'd planned the party itself. I carried that suitcase to the front door. I turned around once, and I looked at the house. Really looked at it. The way you look at something for the last time, even when nobody's told you yet that it is the last time. The kitchen where Margaret taught Curtis to bake, the yellow walls she chose because she believed they helped people forgive each other. The hallway closet door where pencil marks still climbed the frame, marking every inch Curtis grew from kindergarten through his senior year. The maple tree outside the kitchen window that we'd planted the week we brought him home from the hospital. The one where Margaret and I used to sit every anniversary with 2 glasses of lemonade, promising each other we'd grow old together in that yard. One of those promises came true. I was standing there proving in real time that the other one hadn't. I looked at my son one last time. "You have no idea what you just did." I told him. He didn't flinch. Goodbye, Dad. I nodded once, and I walked out my own front door into the dark, carrying a suitcase someone else had packed for me, toward a life I didn't yet know I still had waiting. I sat in my truck at the end of the street for a long time before I turned the key, long enough to cry, which I hadn't let myself do in years, not even at Margaret's funeral. Not really. I cried the way you cry when the grief isn't about losing a thing, but about discovering that someone you built your whole heart around could look you in the eye and feel nothing while taking it apart. When I finally stopped, I wiped my face with an old rag from the glove box and said her name out loud into the empty cab, the way I'd taken to doing in the years since she'd been gone. Margaret, I don't know what to do. I drove without any destination in mind and ended up, almost by instinct, at a small, extended-stay motel off Route 25, the kind of place with a coffee maker bolted to the wall and a window that looked out over a gravel lot instead of a view. I checked in. I unpacked exactly 3 things from that suitcase: my blood pressure medication, a small framed photograph of Margaret from our 30th anniversary, and from the bottom of my overnight bag where I'd slipped it in on instinct months earlier, without even quite admitting to myself, why the cream-colored envelope with my name written across the front in her looping cursive. I sat down on the edge of a motel bed that wasn't mine, in a room that held none of my memories, and I understood, finally, without any more room for denial, that the day my wife had warned me about, the day I would need her more than I needed anything else in the world, had arrived. I turned the envelope over in my hands for a long time before I opened it. Margaret's handwriting had always leaned forward, like it was in a hurry to get somewhere, and even sick, even weak, even in what I now understood were some of the last clear hours she would ever have, it hadn't changed. I unfolded 3 pages, and I read my wife's voice for the first time in 6 years. My Walt, if you're reading this, then something happened that I hoped wouldn't, but that I made sure you'd survive anyway. I don't know what it looks like from where you're sitting right now. Maybe it's Curtis, maybe it's someone else. Maybe it's just the world being unkind to a good man the way it sometimes is. Whatever it is, I want you to know I saw a version of this coming, and I want you to know exactly why. You always believed the best of Curtis, and you should have. He's a good boy underneath everything, even if he loses his way for a while. But I watched him grow up a little too eager to be admired, a little too afraid of not having enough, and I watched Vanessa carry a fear of poverty into our family that she never quite put down. Fear makes people do things love wouldn't otherwise let them do. I don't say that to excuse anyone. I say it so that if this day ever comes, you don't spend the rest of your life wondering how the boy you raised could do something like this. He can. Fear is stronger than most of us want to admit, even in people we love. I made you promise a long time ago that we'd protect what we built, even from family. Especially from family. You laughed at me in Thomas's office that day, and I let you, because I loved you too much to argue about something that scared you to imagine. But I did it anyway, quietly, over the years that followed, because loving someone means protecting them even from the fears they refuse to look at. The house is not everything we have, Walt. It was never everything we have. Go and see Thomas Whitfield. Go and see Diane Cole. Let them show you what I built for you when you weren't looking, so that no ultimatum, no folder of papers, no cold night in a strange bed could ever leave you with nothing. And Walt, don't let this turn you into someone who only fights. Fight for the truth. Fight for yourself. But leave room, always, for the boy who used to carry your toolbox, because it was almost bigger than he was. People can come back from almost anything if you leave the door cracked instead of slamming it shut. I loved him first. I loved you more. Do right by both of those loves, if you can. I'll be waiting under the maple tree, in whatever way people like us get to wait. All my love, always, Margaretti. Don't know how long I sat there after I finished reading. Long enough that the ice machine down the hall cycled twice. Long enough that the framed photograph of her on the nightstand seemed, in the low motel lamplight, to be looking back at me with an expression I hadn't noticed in years. Not sadness, not pity, but a kind of steady, stubborn patience, as if she'd known exactly how long it would take me to need those words, and had been willing to wait that long to say them. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, Before the sun was fully up, I called the number for Thomas Whitfield that Margaret had written in the margin of the letter, small enough that I'd almost missed it. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he was a man who kept early hours out of habit rather than necessity. "Walter Reeves," he said, before I'd even finished introducing myself. "Margaret's husband. I wondered when I might hear from you. You knew her. I drew up her trust documents 12 years ago. I've been holding a few things in reserve ever since, per her instructions, in case a day like this ever came." His voice was calm in the particular way of men who've spent decades absorbing other people's crises without letting it show. "Can you come in this morning?" I was in his office by 10. He was an older man himself, silver-haired, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, an office that smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than I was used to. I told him everything: the ultimatum, the folder, the signature, the suitcase packed and waiting by the door. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer in lawyers than people think, and when I finished, he took his glasses off entirely and set them on the desk. "I've practiced law in this county for 36 years, he said. "I've watched siblings destroy each other over inheritances, watched business partners burn down companies out of spite. I have never, in 36 years, had a client describe their own son handing them a suitcase on their birthday like it was a party favor." He shook his head slowly. "That's not a business decision, Walter. That's cruelty wearing a business decision as a costume." He said he needed the house for collateral. "I'm sure he does need it," Thomas said. "That doesn't make what he did to get it anything other than what it was." He pulled a thick folder from a locked cabinet behind his desk. Not the same folder Curtis had brought to my birthday table, but one that had clearly been waiting years for this exact morning. "Margaret set up a revocable living trust 12 years ago. Most of your savings beyond the house, several investment accounts, the life insurance proceeds that came through when she passed, and a rental duplex she inherited from her aunt. All of it has been sitting in that trust ever since, managed quietly, growing quietly, completely separate from the house you signed away last night." I stared at him. "I didn't know any of that existed. She didn't want you to worry about it while she was alive, and she structured it so it would be protected no matter what happened to the house afterward. She told me once. I remember this clearly, because it struck me as an unusual thing for a woman to say about her own son. She said, 'I don't think Curtis would ever hurt Walter on purpose, but I think fear could make him do something he'd regret. And I want Walter to survive that regret financially, even if it takes years for Curtis to survive it emotionally.'" Thomas slid a summary page across the desk. "She was protecting you from a version of your son she hoped would never exist. I'm sorry to tell you it apparently does." The number at the bottom of that page was larger than I expected, large enough that, paired with my pension and Social Security, I understood within minutes that I hadn't just avoided homelessness. I had, without ever knowing it, spent 6 years quietly wealthy in a way that made the house I'd just lost look, financially at least, almost small by comparison. "What do you want to do?" Thomas asked. "I don't want revenge," I told him, and I meant it. "I just don't want to be anybody's victim anymore." "Those aren't the same thing," he said. "Let's make sure you end up neither." That afternoon I met with Diane Cole, the financial advisor Margaret had also named in her letter, a sharp, kind woman in her 50s who'd been managing the trust's investments since before I'd even known it existed. She walked me through account after account with the patient thoroughness of someone breaking good news to a man who looked, she later told me, like he'd forgotten what good news felt like. "You are not going to worry about money for the rest of your life, Walter," she said finally, turning her monitor to face me. "I need you to actually hear that, not just nod at it." I rented a small furnished apartment that week, overlooking a quiet stretch of the French Broad River. 1 bedroom, a narrow balcony just wide enough for a folding chair and a cup of coffee. It wasn't home, but for the first time since Margaret died, sitting out there in the mornings with the water moving past below me, I felt something that had been missing for a long time. Not happiness, exactly. Something steadier than that. Room to breathe. Dues in a small town travels whether you feed it or not, and Gary Holloway fed himself plenty of it, just by keeping his eyes open next door. He called me most evenings that first month, Not to gossip, he insisted, but because somebody ought to keep you updated. And it sure isn't going to be your son. Through Gary and later through Thomas, I learned the shape of what had actually been happening on the other side of that ultimatum. Curtis's business was in far worse condition than any of us outside that house had understood. 2 commercial clients had folded the previous year, owing him a combined sum in the low 6 figures. Money he'd already spent on equipment and payroll he couldn't claw back. He'd taken out loans against nearly everything he owned trying to bridge the gap. And when the bank finally reviewed his application for a larger loan secured against my former house, they didn't approve it outright the way he'd apparently promised Vanessa they would. Banks, it turns out, look at more than collateral. They look at income, existing debt, cash flow, and a business with 2 years of declining numbers doesn't inspire confidence just because there's a paid-off house attached to the application. 3 weeks after my birthday, Curtis called me for the first time since I'd walked out his front door with a suitcase someone else had packed. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Dad. Quick question. Do you have the original property survey? The bank's asking for paperwork I can't find. What bank, Curtis? Our lender. For the refinancing. I thought you owned the house outright now. A pause stretched long enough that I could hear him breathing on the other end. It's just a formality, he said finally. No, I told him. It isn't, and we both know that. He hung up without another word, and I sat there in my new kitchen holding a phone that had gone quiet, feeling something that surprised me, not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of grim, sorrowful clarity. The way you feel watching a storm you warned someone about finally arrive. A week after that, Gary called sounding more serious than his usual updates. Sheriff's department was out at your old place this morning, he said. Served some paperwork. Ashley, sorry, Vanessa, looked like she wanted to throw something at somebody. Thomas confirmed, through channels I didn't fully understand and didn't ask too many questions about, that 2 of Curtis's equipment suppliers had filed civil claims against the business for unpaid invoices, and that a subcontractor was pursuing a separate breach of contract claim. Behind the pictures Vanessa had spent a year posting online, the new SUV, the vacations, the stone patio, the finished kitchen renovation now underway in what had been my kitchen, sat a mountain of debt that the house I'd signed away wasn't going to be enough to move. I drove past the old place exactly once during that stretch, not to spy. I told myself, just to say a private goodbye to the maple tree. Margaret and I had planted the week we brought Curtis home. Through the front window I could see new cabinetry going in, where the yellow walls used to be. And on the porch, I saw something I hadn't expected. Curtis and Vanessa, screaming at each other loud enough that I could hear fragments through my rolled-up truck window. You told me the bank already approved it, she was shouting. They changed their minds, he shouted back. They didn't change anything, she said. You lied to me. Sophie and Ethan stood just inside the screen door, small and still, watching the way children always watch the things adults think they're too young to understand. I drove away before either of them noticed the truck at the curb. Some moments, I've learned, belong only to the people breaking inside them. That evening, my phone rang and it wasn't Curtis. It was Sophie. Grandpa? Her voice was small and careful in a way that told me she'd rehearsed the call before making it. Hi, sweetheart. Mom says we can't come visit you right now. Something in my chest cracked a little further. I know, baby. I miss you. Are you mad at us? No, never at you two. A long pause, then quieter. I didn't know they were making you leave the house. I thought it was your idea to move. Children believe whatever the adults around them decide to tell them, right up until the world hands them a different truth to hold instead. I know you didn't know, I told her. None of this is your fault, Sophie. Not one piece of it. Before we hung up, she asked me a question I've thought about nearly every day since. Grandpa, are birthdays supposed to make people cry? I closed my eyes. No, sweetheart. They're supposed to remind people how grateful they are, that we're still here to celebrate them. There is a diner about 6 blocks from my new apartment called the Riverside, run by a woman named Elena Marsh, who I started stopping in to see most mornings, mostly because the coffee was good and the silence was easy. Elena was maybe 50, widowed herself, running the place with her son who'd come home from the army with a limp and a quiet way about him that reminded me, in the gentlest way, of the son I used to have before fear got hold of him. Elena noticed the suitcase I still hadn't fully unpacked, sitting folded in the corner of my apartment on the one morning I mentioned it in passing. She didn't ask prying questions. She just started setting a second cup of coffee across from mine most mornings. In case you feel like talking today, and if you don't, that's fine too. I'll drink it myself. Some mornings I talked. Most mornings I didn't. She never once made me feel like either choice was wrong. I don't think I understood, until Elena, how much a person can be steadied simply by someone choosing to sit across from them without demanding anything back. Thomas called me into his office again about 5 weeks after the birthday, sliding a large envelope across his desk. Inside were copies of financial filings, court notices, supplier claims, none belonging to me, all belonging to Curtis. "He never told you any of this because he couldn't," Thomas said. "The moment you knew the truth, you never would have signed a single page of that folder." He was right, and it took me a long moment to admit it, even to myself. If Curtis had come to me honestly, sat me down and said, "Dad, I'm drowning, I need help," I would have found another way. I'd have sold investments, restructured accounts, found some version of a rescue that didn't require handing over the one place that still held every fingerprint of my wife's life inside it. He hadn't asked me for help. He'd taken what he wanted and dressed it up as a formality because some fearful cornered part of him had decided that asking meant admitting he'd failed, and taking felt to him like keeping control. Thomas slid one more document toward me that afternoon, a short letter he'd drafted at my request, addressed to Curtis, containing no threats and no accusations, only facts. The trust, the protected accounts, the legal reality that owning my former house had given him ownership of exactly nothing else. "When he reads this," Thomas said, "he's going to understand, for the first time, what actually happened the moment you signed those papers and walked out that door." I told him to send it. 3 days later, Curtis showed up at Elena's diner. Of all places, Gary must have mentioned where I'd taken to spending my mornings, and stood just inside the door until Elena caught my eye and gave me a small nod, the kind that said, "Your call, Walt, entirely your call." I waved him over. Curtis sat down across from me in the booth without waiting to be invited twice, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Elena set a cup of coffee in front of him without asking if he wanted one, then quietly retreated behind the counter, giving us the kind of privacy a small diner can offer when the person running it decides to offer it. "I read the letter," he said finally. "Whitfield's letter. I figured given you're sitting here." "I didn't know, Dad." His voice cracked slightly on the word "no," the way it used to when he was a boy caught in a lie he hadn't planned well enough. "I swear to you, I had no idea about the trust. I genuinely thought the house was everything. I thought once it was mine, I'd have enough to fix everything, and then I'd make it up to you. I told myself I'd make it up to you. You gave me an ultimatum on my birthday, Curtis, in front of your own children. You had a suitcase packed before I even sat down at the table." He flinched like I'd struck him, and I let the silence sit there instead of softening it, because some silences need to be allowed to do their work. "I don't have an excuse," he said eventually. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but I'm not going to stand here and give you one, because there isn't one that would hold up." I was scared. The business was collapsing, and Vanessa kept saying if we didn't act fast, we'd lose everything, and somewhere in there, I stopped thinking of you as my father and started thinking of you as a problem I needed to solve. He looked down at the coffee he hadn't touched. "I hate saying that out loud. I hate that it was true. Your mother knew this could happen," I told him. 12 years ago. She set up that trust because some part of her understood, long before either of us wanted to admit it, that fear could turn you into someone who'd do exactly what you did." Curtis's eyes filled, and for the first time since he was a teenager, I watched my son actually let tears fall in front of me, instead of turning away to hide them. "She knew," he repeated quietly, like the words themselves hurt to say. "She knew, and she protected you from me before I even knew I needed protecting from. She loved you first," I said, echoing words I hadn't planned to say out loud. words that had been sitting folded inside me since that motel room, 3 pages of her handwriting. She loved me more. She asked me to try and hold both of those at once. I'm trying, Curtis. I want you to know I'm trying. But trying isn't the same as forgetting what happened, and it isn't the same as trusting you again just because you're sorry today. I know, he said. I don't expect it to be. I needed you to know that I know exactly what I did. Not what the business needed. What I did to you, specifically on purpose, because it was easier than admitting I'd failed. We sat in that booth for the better part of an hour, and by the end of it, we hadn't repaired anything. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories that pretend forgiveness arrives in a single conversation do a disservice to anyone actually living through something like this. But we had, for the first time in months, told each other the truth without either of us hiding behind a folder of papers or a rehearsed script. He left without asking me for money, without asking me to reconsider anything about the house, without asking for a single thing at all. He simply thanked me for sitting down and left. I want to tell you it got easier after that conversation. It didn't, not right away. The weeks that followed brought their own quiet storms. The bank, as it turned out, had approved Curtis for a smaller loan than he needed, secured jointly against the house and against remaining business assets, and it bought him perhaps 4 or 5 months of breathing room rather than the rescue he'd been counting on. During those months, Vanessa's mask, the one she'd worn so carefully during her casserole visits and her gentle concerns about my knees on the stairs, began slipping in ways that reached me secondhand, through Gary, through Elena, who heard things at the diner, the way small-town diners hear everything eventually, the thing that finally broke through. The public reckoning, the one that happened in front of witnesses, the way these things sometimes need to, so that truth has somewhere solid to land, arrived at Sophie's school in early autumn, at a fall festival the whole extended family had been invited to, including me, by Sophie herself, who'd apparently decided months earlier that whatever was happening between the grown-ups, her grandfather was still coming to see her school's pumpkin patch display, whether her parents liked it or not. I almost didn't go. Gary talked me into it in his usual understated way, over coffee on my balcony the evening before. Kid asked for you by name, Walt. You don't skip that kind of invitation because the adults around it made a mess of things. So I went. I stood near the back of the gymnasium, among folding chairs and construction paper decorations, watching Sophie's class present a diorama she'd worked on for weeks. A small wooden house with a hand-painted maple tree glued beside it, which she'd told her teacher, apparently without any prompting from anyone, is my grandpa's house where my grandma used to live. I felt something crack open in my chest watching an 11-year-old explain, in front of 30 strangers in folding chairs, that the house mattered because of the people who'd loved each other inside it, not because of the deed attached to it. Curtis and Vanessa were there too, seated a few rows ahead of me, and it was Vanessa, oddly enough, who turned around first and found me standing at the back. She excused herself from her seat during the applause and walked over, and I watched something in her posture that I hadn't seen in the 14 years I'd known her. Not performance, not strategy, just plain exhaustion. I owe you an apology, she said, low enough that only I could hear it over the noise of the gymnasium, not the kind I've been giving. A real one. I'm listening. I grew up watching my dad lose everything twice before I turned 16. Every time we had something nice, I braced for it to disappear. When Curtis's business started slipping, I panicked in a way I don't think you can understand unless you've lived it, and I convinced myself your house was the only thing standing between us and becoming my parents all over again. She looked down at her hands. I told myself we deserved it. I told myself you'd understand eventually, that you'd be grateful once you saw how much better things would be for everyone. I never once let myself actually think about what it would feel like for you, walking out your own front door with a suitcase I packed. Her voice wavered. I taught my kids that things matter more than people, Walt. I watched Sophie build a diorama about a house she's never even going to inherit, and I understood, standing there, exactly what I'd done to this family. I didn't tell her it was all right, because it wasn't, and I've learned that pretending otherwise doesn't actually help anyone heal faster. But I told her I believed she meant it, and that meaning it was, at minimum, a place to start from. 3 days later, Curtis came to my apartment carrying a small manila envelope. He looked older than his years that morning, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, the confident posture that used to define him replaced by something more careful, more uncertain. I let him in. He sat at my small kitchen table, the one that would never carry the same 30 years of memory as the oak table Margaret and I had saved for, and set the envelope down between us. "I signed the house back over to you," he said. "Full deed, no conditions. I know it doesn't undo anything. I just, I needed to give it back before I could figure out how to give anything else back." I opened the envelope and looked at the deed inside, my name printed clean and official across the top, and I sat there for a long moment before sliding it back across the table. "I don't want it, Curtis." He stared at me, confused in a way that reminded me, briefly, painfully, of the boy who used to look up at me for answers to every question the world threw at him. "What? Dad, it's yours. It's your house." "It was my house," I said. "There's a difference. I already said my goodbye to it. The night I drove away with a suitcase, you didn't even pack yourself. I don't need the deed back to know what your mother and I built there. I carry that with me. I don't need four walls to prove it." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to stop trying to fix this with paperwork," I told him. "Paper is what got us here in the first place. I want to see you show up, actually show up, for months, for years, not for a folder full of signatures on one good afternoon." We sold the house within the month, not to strangers looking to flip it for profit, but to a young couple with a 3-year-old daughter who ran laughing through the backyard during their first walkthrough and stopped, without any prompting, directly beneath Margaret's maple tree, looking up through the branches like she already understood something the adults hadn't told her yet. Her mother told me, as they signed the closing papers, that they'd take good care of it. I believed her the way you believe someone whose eyes tell you the truth before their words catch up. With the proceeds, I bought a small cottage of my own not far from the river, 1 bedroom, a workshop out back, where I could still tinker with the machinist's tools I'd carried out of that plant 31 years of habit ago, a porch just wide enough for 2 folding chairs, in case anyone ever wanted to sit with me, the way Gary used to sit at our old shared fence. Thomas helped me restructure the trust one more time before I considered any of this finished. I set aside an education fund for Sophie and Ethan, college, trade school, or seed money for whatever business either of them might someday want to build honestly, on their own footing, without ever needing to take from someone who loved them to get there. The only condition I attached was that they complete basic financial literacy coursework and a modest amount of community service each year before they could draw from it. Thomas read the final draft back to me and smiled the small, private smile of a man who'd known my wife longer than some of her own family had. "Margaret would approve of every line of this," he said. "I know she would," I told him. "I know so," he said again, correcting me gently, the way old friends correct each other. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. And I want to be honest about that too, because fairy tales are easy to tell and hard to trust. Curtis didn't call every day. He didn't ask for forgiveness on any regular schedule, and he never once, not a single time, asked me for money again. Instead, he started showing up on Saturday mornings at my new workshop, mostly quiet, mostly just handing me tools before I asked for them the way he used to as a boy, the two of us repairing old furniture or sitting on the porch, drinking coffee without needing to fill every silence with words. Trust, I've learned, doesn't rebuild itself in conversations. It rebuilds itself in Saturdays, one ordinary, unremarkable Saturday stacked carefully on top of the last one, until eventually there are enough of them to stand on. Vanessa started volunteering at a food pantry across town, quietly, without posting a single photograph of it anywhere. Elena mentioned once, in passing, that she'd seen her there stacking canned goods on a Wednesday evening after work, looking, in Elena's words, like a woman doing something because it mattered, not because anyone was watching. Sophie sent me letters through that autumn, actual handwritten letters, folded into envelopes she decorated herself with horses in the margins. Ethan started coming to my workshop some Saturdays alongside his father, sanding down small pieces of pine into shapes only an 8-year-old could love. And one afternoon he held up a lopsided little birdhouse, not unlike the one Curtis had built for his mother decades earlier, and asked me, with the particular seriousness only children manage to hold on to, "Grandpa, do you think Grandma would have liked this one?" "She would have loved it," I told him, and I meant every word. Nearly a year after that birthday, Curtis and I sat together on my porch one evening, watching the light fall off the river the way it does in early autumn, orange going to purple, going to something too dark to name. He was quiet for a long while before he finally spoke. "I still think about that night," he said. "The ultimatum. The suitcase. I think about it almost every day. So do A. You told me I had no idea what I'd just done. I thought you meant the money. I thought you meant losing collateral for the loan." He shook his head slowly. "It took me months to understand you weren't talking about money at all." "No," I said. "I was talking about us." He nodded, and for a long moment neither of us said anything else, because some things don't need more words once they've finally been understood correctly. "Thank you," he said eventually, "for leaving the door open. I know you didn't have to." "Thank your mother," I told him. "She's the one who taught me how. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to leave you with the one thing I've carried out of all of this, more than anything else. A house can be replaced. Given enough time, even money can be earned back. Even a relationship broken as badly as mine and my son's was can, sometimes slowly, be rebuilt. Not perfectly, not all at once, but rebuilt all the same, one honest Saturday at a time. But respect is not something you're owed simply for sharing blood with someone. Respect is a choice people make or fail to make every single day in ordinary rooms over ordinary dinners, long before any birthday cake or folder of papers ever forces the question into the open. If your parents are still here, call them today. Not because you owe them an apology, but because you might not always get the chance to offer one. If you've made a mistake the size of the one my son made, don't let years pass before you're honest about it. The truth only gets heavier the longer you carry it alone. And if someone in your life has genuinely, actually changed, not just apologized, but changed, in the small repeated ways that actually count, don't be afraid to leave the door open just a little, the way my wife asked me to, even from a hospital bed, even when she had every reason to believe I might not have the strength left to do it. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't watching the person who hurt you lose everything. Sometimes it's watching them, slowly, Saturday by Saturday, become someone worth trusting again. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone in your own life worth calling tonight, I'd be grateful if you shared it with them. And if you'd like to hear more stories about family, forgiveness, and the quiet kind of strength that follows betrayal, stay close and join me again next time. Thank you for listening.